All right, let's get into this really powerful story from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9. I mean, it is a story of incredible contrasts. You have this amazing divine revelation happening on a mountaintop, and then, bam, it's immediately followed by this total failure down in the valley below. And the whole thing, it really boils down to one central, super urgent question.
And this was the question on literally everyone's mind. I mean, Jesus has been out there teaching, healing people, gathering this huge following, and the buzz is just getting louder and louder. But here's the thing. Nobody, and I mean nobody, from the guys in the halls of power all the way to his own inner circle, seems to have a solid answer.
So you've got the regional ruler, right? Herod. He's hearing all these reports, and frankly, he's getting pretty nervous. He's wondering, is this some old prophet come back to life? And even Jesus's closest followers, they're struggling too. When he puts the question to them directly, their best shot is to just, repeat the rumors they've heard on the street. Then Peter has this huge breakthrough moment. He declares, "You are the Messiah of God." You'd think there'd be cheering, right? But nope. Instead of celebrating, Jesus just pivots hard. He starts talking not about all the glory and power they're expecting, but about suffering, rejection, and death. He basically tells them, look, the path of the Messiah, and anyone who wants to follow me, it leads straight to a cross. You can just imagine how much that deepened the confusion.
So, to finally settle this whole identity crisis once and for all, the story takes us up a mountain. Jesus grabs his inner circle, that's Peter, James, and John, to go witness this moment of just spectacular divine clarification. It's an event we now call the Transfiguration. Now, what's really interesting is how the author, Luke, actually puts this scene together. He's using this ancient legal standard of having 2 or 3 witnesses to establish the truth of what's about to go down. So this isn't just some private dream or vision. No. This is a confirmed event, and the testimony, well, it's about to come from the highest possible authority you can get. And Luke's version of this story is really unique. According to the biblical scholar Dr. Daniel Darko, Luke isn't just, repeating a story he heard somewhere. He is intentionally shaping this narrative. He's adding very specific details to drive home a very particular point about who Jesus really is.
I mean, just look at these details. Luke really makes a point that this whole divine revelation happens while they're praying. That's a huge theme for him. He also describes Moses and Elijah simply as 2 men, which is huge because it stresses that the disciples saw actual, real, visible figures, not some kind of weird hallucination. And their reaction? It wasn't awe, it was pure terror. For Luke, a true encounter with the divine is supposed to be a frightening, totally overwhelming experience. And this is where Luke's key point just brilliantly comes into focus. While the other Gospels have the voice from heaven saying, "My beloved Son," Luke uses a different word. He uses "my chosen." Think about that. You've got Moses, the great lawgiver, and Elijah, the great prophet, standing right there. And God specifically points to Jesus and says, he's the one. He is the chosen one. So what are these 3 massive figures from Jewish history even talking about? Well, Luke tells us they spoke of Jesus's exodus. That one word, man, it is packed with meaning. It's deliberately connecting Jesus's coming death and resurrection to the foundational salvation story of Israel. Moses leading his people from slavery to freedom. The message is clear. Jesus is about to kick off a new and ultimate exodus. But right from this incredible spiritual peak, the story just immediately comes crashing back down to earth, right into the messy, painful reality of the valley. The disciples, they're fresh off seeing literal divine glory. And now, they're about to face a major test. A man from the crowd cries out, just desperate. He says his only son is tormented by a spirit that causes these violent seizures, and he is just at his wit's end. He's come to Jesus' disciples, begging them for help.
So here's the crucial point. They fail. Completely. I mean, these are the very men who were just given a preview of heavenly glory, who were supposedly given authority to heal and cast out demons, and they are rendered totally powerless in the face of this boy's suffering.
Jesus' response, it is sharp. You can tell he's just frustrated. And yeah, while he's talking to the whole generation, you know that this rebuke is landing squarely on his disciples. He's basically implying their failure isn't about a lack of technique or some special power. It's a fundamental failure of faith. And then he just heals the boy himself and hands him back to his father. And this wasn't just a one-off bad day for the disciples.
As Dr. Darko points out, Luke is presenting this as part of a much larger pattern, something he calls the negative shadows of the apostles. He's revealing their deep-seated flaws right as the mission is starting to get really serious. I mean, it is a stunningly human picture, isn't it? First, you have this clear lack of faith right when it matters most. Then, almost immediately after this epic failure, what do? They start arguing about their own status, about who's the greatest. And to top it all off, they show this petty professional jealousy getting all bent out of shape that someone outside their group is successfully doing the very thing they just failed at.
So, after laying out this whole catalog of failures, this lack of faith, this ego, this jealousy, you have to ask, what is the ultimate point Luke is trying to make here? It seems like a pretty bleak picture of the people Jesus chose, right?
And this is the incredible twist in the whole story. Luke intentionally shows us their deepest flaws to make a really profound point. The foundation of the church, this movement that would change the world, wasn't built by perfect, spiritual giants, no. It was built by these ordinary, insecure, and, often failing people. The contrast here is it's everything. In this moment, down in the valley, they are powerless, they're obsessed with their own status, and they are riddled with doubt. But these are the exact same people who will later become the pillars of the early church, the leaders of a new movement, ignited with a passion that is literally going to change the world. Their transformation, that is the central, hopeful message of this entire story. And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? This story isn't just about them. It's kind of like a mirror for us. It suggests that real growth doesn't come from being perfect, but from following a purpose that's way bigger than ourselves, even when we're in the valley of our own failures. It really asks us to think about that journey, from who we are right now, flaws and all, to who we have the potential to become.